All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to season 13 of Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico. Joining me this week on Coach's Corner is my good friend and PGA professional, John Decker. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in just a moment. Just a couple of program changes this evening. We were going to have a travel section tonight. Unfortunately, our guest had a scheduling conflict, so he's not going to be on, but he is going to come on next week with my good friend, travel expert, Robert Kaufman. But we are going to be joined a little bit later on by my featured guest, Mark Mattingly, the Executive Vice President of Landscapes Golf Management. He's going to be joining me on the second half of the show. Just a couple of quick announcements as well. Don't forget, if you want to see all of these broadcasts, you can go to the iGolf Sports YouTube channel, or you can also catch them on Spotify. If you're interested in just hearing the audio version only, not a problem. You can go to Spreaker.com. All of the previously aired shows for Golf Talk Live, as well as the current ones there in their audio format, are available at Spreaker.com, or basically wherever you listen to podcasts, you can catch the audio versions there. But I'm glad you joined us tonight, and we got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my friend John, bring him on the show. I know most of you are probably familiar with him, and then we'll get into tonight's discussion on the Coach's Corner panel. So John, of course, is the Director of Instruction at the Medallion Club up in Columbus, Ohio. He's also a senior contributing editor and a top 25 instructor with Golf Tips magazine. And he was also the 2015 Southern Ohio Teacher of the Year and author of two great books, Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, and Fairways to Heaven, One Shot at a Time, which also coincidentally happens to be the host of a podcast with the same name. We'll talk about that more a little bit later on. And he's also available for public speaking upon request. So, John, welcome to Golf Talk Live's Coach's Corner.
Yeah, thanks for having me on tonight. Looking forward to it.
Not a problem. I apologize for
That's all right.
Apologizing to the Lord for messing up the title, but that's what happens when you got too many accolades. I've got to try to get them all in.
Yes.
But we'll recap that a little bit later on as well and get it right the next time around. But thank you as always, John. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and we're going to talk about a number of different things. But one of the things is a lot of big mistakes, I think, that amateur golfers tend to make. And one of them is, and this is kind of something that probably a lot of people don't think about. I know you do, but a lot of our amateur golfers don't think about. And they tend to really not spend a lot of time really doing anything on swing maintenance. And what I mean by that is they just sort of get up there and hitting balls, and they don't really think about their swing at all and how they can work on it and try to improve it. They're just sort of going through the motions a lot of time. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then I'll throw some thoughts in there as well. But I think working on your swing maintenance and getting it down right to the way that works best with your body is something that we can all do from time to time. But a lot of amateurs seem to neglect that. So what are your thoughts here?
That's a great point, Ted. You know, when you go to the driving range, you want to have a purpose. If you're getting ready to tee off and you're warming up, that's different than if you're working on your golf game. So when I'm playing in a tournament or just going out to play a casual round of golf, my main focus is just to loosen up my body, hit shots, do some stretching, light stretching, and just get a feel for my swing and what I'm trying to do. If I'm working on my game, then I'm going to be using alignment sticks. I'm going to be really focusing on, I might video my swing. I'm going to be focusing more on the mechanics. The idea, though, is that you have a purpose. I like to tell my students, you need to define why you're there. And when you define why you're there, then you need to make sure and stick to that lane. Don't warm up and then 15 minutes into your warm up say, I'm going to try this swing tip that I saw on YouTube last night. That's not the time to work or tinker with your swing. So, it's good to have a purpose. I think every tour player pretty much has some sort of thought of what they're trying to do in their golf swing. But what we don't want to do is make that thought turn into paralysis to analysis where we're thinking about too many things. So what I always try to do in my own game, and this is something that I try to also pass on to my students, is make sure that whatever I'm doing mechanically, I'm always doing it in relationship to the target. I'm not getting so focused on a position. It's an overall motion, an overall feeling and I always want to be turning and facing the target. If you're going back and holding yourself in one position and looking at yourself, I think that's when you start really getting too mechanical in the swing, and then that usually does not translate very well on the golf course.
Yeah, well said. And just a couple things I want to add to that. You're exactly right. I think you have to when you're going there, you want to be practicing with some sort of purpose. And one of the things that I want to differentiate for people is there's really two times that you're going to go to the golf course. There's one, you're going to go there to actually in preparation to playing around. So you're going to go there and you're going to warm up a little bit. And then there's a time when you're going to go, whether you're working with your coach or whether you're on your own, where you're actually going to work on specific fundamentals and things. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But aspects of your golf swing. So you're going to work on your game and make whatever adjustments or changes at that time. You don't want to do that during a warm up. You want to do that in a practice session. Going to your point, so you want to have a sense of purpose. You don't want to overemphasize on too many things. And if there's certain things that maybe your coach has said you need to work on, that's the time when to do it. Not right before you're about ready to go out in the golf course. That's a warm up session where you're just getting loose and kind of getting things. And whatever you happen to have that day, whether it's a big old banana ball or whether you got a snap hook, you might have to deal with it and make it, some minor adjustments, but you don't want to be tinkering around at that point, because otherwise it's just going to be a really bad round. So, for me, what I try to do is I try to get my students to identify, okay, is this a practice session? Is this when I'm going to work on some of the mechanics and things that I need to be working on? Or am I just getting ready to head out to the golf course? And once I decide, okay, what it is that I'm going to be doing is going to dictate what I'm actually going to do when I'm at the golf course. So I think those are things. And as far as the swing maintenance is concerned, I think you have to be out there. And even if you can't make it to the golf course, go out in the backyard when the weather's a little bit warmer. I mean, you're up in the north there, so I know it's still a little bit cool some days, but you can get out and otherwise, or you can just, mimic it inside in front of a mirror and just sort of practice the feel and the motion of the golf swing and just sort of ingrain that in your sort of physical being and your thought process as you get ready to begin a new season. But yeah, you can overdo it a little bit too much, and you got to be careful of that. The other thing I want to get you to talk a little bit about, you sort of led into it, is a lot of golfers tend to neglect the fundamentals. Nicklaus famously, and we've said this many times on the show, Nicklaus talked about how important it was each season when he came out that he went over all of the fundamentals. As stellar of a player as he was, as many majors as he was, the fundamentals were important at the beginning of the season as they were in the middle and the end of the season for him. What are your thoughts here, and how do you get the students motivated to be working and focusing on those fundamentals to make sure they're sound?
Well, that's a great point, Ted, because, Jack Nicklaus has won 18 majors, and arguably, in my opinion, he's the greatest player, if you base it on record, to ever play the game. And he said that every spring, the first thing he would do would meet with Jack Grout. He would say, look at my grip, look at my ball position, look at my distance from the ball, because tour players, just like all of us, fall into bad habits, especially when you lay off. And you think about back when Jack Nicklaus was playing, he was probably done, sometime in late September, early October. He wasn't playing in November. He wasn't playing in December competitively. And then in January, that's kind of when, the tour kind of would get started back up. And so even for a player like that, when you've laid off for 2 or 3 months, you're liable to fall into some bad habits. And so it's important with all of my students. The first thing that I look at with any student is their grip. And the second thing I look at is their ball position. To me, those are the most important two things that go on in the setup. And I say this with every student I teach. I'll never teach you to have a perfect swing, but I will teach you to have a perfect setup. And so we're always working on the setup. So I would encourage the listeners out there to go to your local PGA golf professional. And even if you're not someone that takes a lot of lessons, it is worth once a year having a lesson and say, I want you to look at my setup, maybe film my swing if you want to see your swing, but really look at my setup to make sure that I have the setup proper. Because if you don't have a good setup, you're never going to have a good golf swing. I've never seen a great golf swing with a bad setup.
Yeah.
I just never have it. You have to have that first. And it's the most important thing. It's really the most important position. Everyone talks about impact, but impact is not a position. It is part of a sequence of events. The only position really, that the two positions in golf are the setup and the finish. Those are the ones where the club is completely, stopped moving. And so you got to get that set up first. And so to me, that's where this time of year, that's where you should be, working on. And don't just do it for the full swing. So, go look at your putting setup, look at your chipping, your bunker, all of these different things, because if your ball position has moved around, it's going to start affecting your golf swing.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I think you'd probably agree, it's important to incorporate working with fundamentals. It's not just something you do at the beginning of the season, you sort of forget about it. It might be something that you might want to spend a couple of minutes each time you go to the golf course when you're going there, whether it's a practice session, even for a warm up. I mean, you don't want to be making drastic changes, but you want to make sure, am I gripping the club correctly? Is the ball position where I need it to be today? I'm getting ready to play in 20, 30 minutes. And again, you don't want to be making any major changes, but I think it's important throughout the season to be still always sort of checking your fundamentals, if anything. So, how would you say, if you were going to work with a student and let's say they were going to spend 30 minutes a couple of times a week, how much time, if any, should they be dedicating to working on their fundamentals of that 30-minute practice session?
Well, I heard an interview with Tiger Woods when he was working with Butch Harmon. At the time, he was the #1 player in the world, and they asked him how he was in the Golf Talk studio or the Golf Live studio there in Orlando, and they asked him, how much time does he spend on his setup, and he said, oh, about 2 hours a day. And I was blown away, absolutely blown away. He said he looks at his setup, that is where he spends the majority of time. He already has a good golf swing, but you can't, if you don't have the setup perfect, then you're never going to have that, a great swing. And I don't know if he was exaggerating in that and I'm sure he was hitting balls. He wasn't just standing there in a static position for 2 hours.
Sure.
But every time he would look at his swing, that was what he was focusing on, is, do I have the setup right? Because keep in mind, you're on a perfect lie when you're taking a lesson. You're on a level tee box, unless you're out on the golf course doing a playing lesson. And we all know that when you get out there, you're going to get all kind of uneven lies. So I think in a 30-minute lesson, you ought to, at a bare minimum, focus, 5 to 10 minutes on just your setup. And you can do that by looking in a mirror. You can do that by having someone film your swing. You can do that by having a teacher stand there and tell you whether you're doing it right or wrong. But it's definitely worth getting that grip right is where it all starts.
Yeah, and that's something too you can work at home when you don't have
Mm-hmm.
your coach around. Once you kind of, and that's where having some video handy that when you're at home, you can put it on your phone or on your computer, and you can kind of review that when you're not around your coach or your teaching pro, and you can kind of look at some of those things. Once you've been taught to set up properly, you can say, okay, that's what I've got to do, and then you maybe get in front of a mirror when you're at home. When you're at the golf course, of course, you have maybe your coach on hand to help you through that, but I agree. I think, certainly a minimum of 5 minutes if you're just in a regular practice session. If you're in a longer session, again, I don't necessarily think you have to spend 2 hours as Tiger does, but then again, he's won 15 majors. So, he's certainly made good use of his time. But I think when you're out there for at least 30 minutes at a time, certainly at least 5 minutes minimum, maybe 10 minutes, as you suggest, would be worthwhile. This one here, John, is something that you don't hear too much about or people don't really think about, but it's another mistake that a lot of our amateur golfers make. And they typically only look at the yardage to the pin when they're coming to their approach shots. They're just thinking about the yardage to the pin. They're not looking to see what the yardage to the front of the green or the back of the green is. And there, certainly other positions, maybe there's bunkers and things like that. They're certainly focused on one yardage, and that's to the pin. And a lot of times, that might not bode well for them. When you're with a student and you're, working on their game out there on the golf course, when you're doing a playing lesson and you're working on things like approaching the green, what are some of the stats you're wanting them to look at? What information are you wanting them to gather so they can make an informed decision on what shot they're going to be able to play?
Well, the first thing that you want to look at with any shot is where you can't go. You've got to look at the trouble first. So that's one thing. But when it comes to yardage, I'm looking at to the front of the green. I want to know my carry distance to the front. You'll hear when the microphones are up there on those players and then their conversations with their caddy, they'll say terms like, 152 to cover. And they basically mean to cover the bunker or to cover to the front. If it's over trouble, it's to cover. If it's to like the front, then they'll say the front. So you want to know the distance to the front of the green. You want to know the distance to the pin. Obviously, if I'm hitting a pitching wedge, my ball is going to react differently when it hits the green than if I'm hitting a 4-iron. And then they want to know the different distance to the back. Then the next thing that I want to look at is the distance from the pin to the left and right.
Yeah.
Because if I've got 30 feet to the right of the pin and I've got 6 feet to the left of the pin, then my target is not the pin. My target is to the right of the pin. And so you have to understand that you're, in this, even the best players in the world are not hitting shots at the flag every single time. And so Tiger said, and I heard he said this in an interview. He goes, "I always play aggressively, but I have a conservative target." Mm-hmm. And that's a great way to think about it, because if my target is 15 or 20 feet right of the pin, that means I'm moving away from the left side of the green. That's going to take a lot of pressure off of me. I'm going to be like, okay, I've got plenty of room. I'm not aiming where I'm going to run, the risk of missing it to the left and short-sighting myself. And so I'm going to be much more able to go ahead and free up and make a good golf swing. But if I've got 6 feet of pin to the left of or 6 feet of green to the left of the pin, and I'm going at the pin, now all of a sudden I've got a lot of anxiety, a lot of nerves. And that's something that you don't want to do. A perfect example was Bryson DeChambeau at number 11 in the Masters. When he hit it in the water. He should have never, ever, ever hit that shot. And it cost him any chance of winning the tournament, because that is the hardest, most difficult hole in the golf course. And that is a pin you cannot take on back left. And he did, and he hit it in the water, and that was it for him. So, aggressive play means having a conservative target and an aggressive swing. And if you do that, you're going to do a lot better on the golf course.
Yeah, you want to minimize the risk as much as possible, and you want to play to your percentages. And I mean by the strengths of that. If the shot that you're looking at as an example, if you have a very low percentage of success, then that's a shot you need to step away from. And as you're pointing out, if you've got very little green to the left of the pin, or right for that matter, then if you're aiming at the pin, you're now increasing the likelihood, if you miss it to the right or the left, whichever the short side is, you're running the risk of now turning what could be a good shot into a bad shot potentially, because you don't know what's on the left. In that case, like as you point out with Bryson, he had water on the left, and it was a tight pin to the left side of the green. Yep. And, a few seconds later, splash in the water. And now he's looking at, a whole different number than what he was originally looking at. So yeah, you're exactly right. You need to understand where the, where you want to place your shot. You need to know the various yardages, not just to the pin. You need to know to the front. And again, depending on the club you're going to be using, you may even need to know to the back of the green, and obviously left and right, and where the trouble is, what yardage is going to take to carry certain, whether it be a bunker or whether it be water, whatever the case may be. You need to have that information. Here's another one that sort of goes hand in hand, and I think a lot of amateurs make this mistake as well, is they treat their maximum yardages as their stock. Yeah. So, they're maybe flushing their 7-iron 160 yards at the best, but realistically, maybe they're only hitting it 150 most of the time, but they're thinking, okay, I can hit my 7-iron 160 yards, but that's when they're hitting it really solid and really flush. So that's their max yardage that they're hitting it, and they're treating that as their stock yardage. Where's the mistakes here?
Yeah, that is the recipe for disaster. That's you cannot play to your maximum yardage unless you are at a really elite player and you're really swinging well, and your game is at that finely tuned that you can do that. But even the tour players are allowing themselves a little room for error. And when you're swinging really well, that's different. But for the average golfer out there, you need to make sure that you're playing more to the average. And so if you look at your best shot, let's say we'll just use a 7-iron, for example. Let's say that your best 7-iron will go 150 yards, and your average 7-iron goes 140 yards. And if you hit a really poor shot, it might go 130 or 135. Then obviously, if you've got a 145-yard shot or 150-yard shot over water, then you may want to consider going to a 6-iron. Yep. Or you may want to consider playing away from the water, depending on where the water is. That's a situation where you're better off to take more club and go too far than to come up short. If the trouble's long and you're 150 yards away, and you're from the pin and the trouble's over the green, then absolutely, then in that situation you can hit a 7-iron, because there's no trouble or there's no penalty if you do happen to hit a 135-yard shot. You're just in front of the green, and that's a reasonable miss. Not every shot's going to be perfect. And then for those of you out there that are playing up here in the north where it's cool and the ball's not going anywhere, I went out and played a few holes today, and a perfect example is I had a shot today where it was 177 yards to the pin, and but I was hitting into the breeze, and it was wet, and I played it like it was. I told myself I'm going to play this like it's a 185-yard shot, and went ahead, instead of hitting a 6-iron, which I normally would hit, I hit a 5-iron and hit it very well and knocked it up there pin high on the green, and I was happy and proud of myself because I didn't get sucked into, I know I can hit a 6-iron this far. I went ahead and just accepted the fact that I can't do anything about the temperature. I can't do anything about the wet conditions I was playing in. I went ahead and took more club to make sure and cover that distance.
Yeah, and there's so many other factors that can play into that. You might be looking into a headwind, or you might have a wind left to right that's going to affect your ball flight and your distance. So yeah, you've got to, you've got to understand the average that you're hitting it, and people look at it as where the ball comes to rest as the yardage, but it's really not. It's how far you're carrying it. So if you're hitting it and you're only carrying it 135, but maybe it rolls a few extra 5 to 10 extra yards depending on the lie, you don't add those extra 10 yards as your carry distance.
Yeah.
So you got to be, so that's smart. The example you gave for yourself is very smart. Is you played to your strength. You said, okay, I know I can hit, in the best of circumstances, I know I can use my 6-iron here, but because of the circumstances, I'm going to use a 6-iron or a 5-iron, and make sure I'm going to get there. And obviously it paid off for you. So hopefully you
I missed the putt though.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, hopefully you
two-putted,
the deal,
yeah.
but that's all right. You still give yourself a chance. If you hadn't have done that, you might not at least had that chance. So
that's right.
But so here's another one too, John, that I want you to touch on a little bit. And we see this a lot, especially with some of our shorter shots, and it could be pitch shots, what have you, is we'll often see a lot of amateurs take a very long backswing. And that creates a myriad of problems because they're coming way back with the club. Maybe it's only 85 yards. They're coming way, way back. And what ends up happening is they decelerate on the way down because they know they've gone too far back.
Yeah.
So how do you develop consistency with that? How do you know? I mean, again, it goes back to knowing your yardages, Nat, and understanding it. But how do you balance that out to make sure that you're not going too far back where you have to decelerate and then obviously end up a whole myriad of problems come up? So talk about some of the issues that brings by having too long of a backswing, and what's your sort of theory or recommendation on how you can sort of help to deal with that?
Well, by far my favorite part of the game to practice and to execute is the wedges. I love hitting wedge shots. And so when I hit wedge shots, I try to always balance my swing. And so for the listeners out there, take your pitching wedge and maybe make a waist-high backswing and a waist-high follow-through and see how far your ball goes in the air. See, and just pull out a rangefinder and just start, really, it's not going to go as far as a normal shot. And then make a little longer backswing and then a little longer follow through and then a full backswing and a full follow through. And start learning to make different swings when you're using your wedges, when you're playing inside of 100 yards. It's important to understand that whatever you do on the backswing, you want to repeat on the follow through. So if you're going all the way back, you better be coming all the way through. And so, like you said, deceleration happens a lot inside of 100 yards, especially when you start getting in putting and chipping around the greens. You see people stop. And the biggest reason is because the student or the player is trying to hit the ball instead of swing through the ball. And look at the Masters. Rory did it on 13. It was a perfect example. I don't know his exact yardage, but he couldn't have been more than 80 to 100 yards from the pin, and he was supposedly aiming way left of the pin, and he didn't commit and did not accelerate and go through the shot. He left it open and hit it obviously in the water, and it could have cost him the tournament. Thank goodness it didn't. So even at the highest levels, you see this, and it's because what happens is in my opinion, a lot of this is mental, because we feel like we want to try to control the club to the ball instead of allowing the club to swing through. And when you get tense and you get tight and you start swinging to the ball, a lot of times you'll stop and you'll decelerate.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Yeah, I remember that, and I was thinking the exact same thing when Rory was on that hole, and it went out to the right, and I was thinking, God, this is going to be bad if he doesn't.
No.
And fortunately, he made good on it, but it could have been that could have literally, just like you were talking about earlier on number 11 for Bryson, that could have been the nemesis for Rory on that hole, if he wasn't able to clean it up, shall we say? But yeah, something interesting, and I remember there was I'm going to age myself now, but way back there was a series of videos that came out, and I remember the late Payne Stewart, Craig Statler, Tom Kite, I think Fuzzy Zeller. There was a whole group of them that did a series of videos together. And there was a video that Tom Kite was involved in. He was talking about the short game. And of course, Tom was one of the earlier players at that time on the PGA that really started incorporating multiple wedges. In fact, he was one of the first on the tour. I wouldn't say the first necessarily, but certainly among the first to have 4 wedges in the bag. And one of the things that was really interesting that he talked about, he said what he did is when he practiced is whatever wedge, let's say his pitching wedge, he would use the same swing on that pitching wedge, but if he needed to draw it back 5 yards or he needed to increase it 5 yards, his way of doing it is rather than manipulating the swing itself or shortening the swing, he would swing the exact same, but he would choke down on the club, and that would be just enough. So he might choke an inch down, maybe an inch and a half, depending on what the yardage he needed, and he did that with all of his clubs. And people forget that, and you see a lot of times what you'll see out in the practice tee, you'll see somebody hitting their full wedge and they'll say, I need to hit it half the distance. And they try to shorten the swing and they're getting stabby at it and yet Tom just said, you know what, I'm just going to shorten my grip, but I'm going to use the same swing. Maybe I might have to change the club in some cases, but that's what he would do. And I mean, he was pretty stellar with his short game, as you recall. So, but I go back to some of these old videos. I mean, they were on VHS. So that's, like I said, it shows you how far back it is. I'm sure you could probably find them somewhere. Somebody's probably uploaded them, but that was another way that he dealt with it was simply making adjustments in how he gripped the club by choking down, as opposed to actually changing and manipulating his golf swing. So it's just something I wanted to throw in there. I think a lot of players might benefit from something like that. Again, it may not work for everybody, but it was certainly successful for Tom in his career. Here's one that I think a lot of people too, John, don't really think about. Now, there's obviously situations where you're going to want to have the club face square, and if you might even have to shut it a little bit. And I'm talking about bunker shots. Quite often what you do is you see a lot of players not opening the club face, especially on a greenside bunker. They're not utilizing the bounce of that club, and they're ending up either the face is completely square or they've even shut it down a little bit, thinking that that's going to help them get underneath the ball. And that clears a whole myriad of problems. Obviously, there's situations where you might have to do that if the ball is plugged or up against the lip where you just need to pop it out. But that's one too. Do you see that as well with some players where they're not really opening up and utilizing the club face itself for with the sand wedge? What are your thoughts?
Yes, the bounce of the club is really there to help you. It's there to help the club slide through the sand. You don't want your club to dig in the sand unless your ball is buried. That's when you want your club to dig. So if you square the face, or if you square the face and put your hands in front of the shaft and have a lot of forward shaft lean, you're not going to be a good bunker player. You're going to go under the ball. You're literally going under the ball too much, and you're not going to get it out. And then every now and then you're going to catch the ball and you're going to hit a long shot. So you want to be coming in when the ball's sitting up on the sand. You want to be coming in shallow. You want to use the back of the club or the bounce. And to do this, the easiest way to use the bounce is to open up the face. Now, the key to opening up the face is to open up the face and then take your grip. You do not take your grip and then open up the face. If you do that, that's not the right way to do it. So you open the face. I call it, when I have 3 different ways that I'll look at the club face. 12 o'clock, where the club is literally straight up and down. If for a right-handed player, if I turn it to 1 o'clock, that's going to be an okay lie to a medium lie to okay lie, I'll open it to 1 o'clock. If I have a good lie, I'll open it up to 2 o'clock. And so I have, the more I open that face up, the more the club will slide. The more I square the club face up, the more the club will dig. But I never want my hands in front of the ball. My hands, in fact, if I want to hit it higher, are going to be behind the ball. This allows the club head to go past the hands, giving me maximum loft, maximum spin, and the maximum height on the shot.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you stop to think of these mistakes that we're talking about, how common they really are with a lot of our amateurs. And what people don't realize is, when you think about some of the ones that we've just talked about, and there's a few more that we're going to get to here in a moment, is when you start adding all of these up and you look at the different things, not working on your swing, not really focusing on the fundamentals, and then, not understanding how to, figure out the yardage besides just to the pin. And you go over the course of your round and you apply those theories and those mistakes to your round, you're probably losing a lot of strokes in the grand scheme of things. You're not losing strokes to one issue in most cases. It's several issues throughout. So it could be poor mechanics with the fundamentals. It could be, not addressing the yardages, maybe not factoring in how far you're actually hitting each of your clubs, not understanding that. So when you start putting these together and you start really assessing your round and really digging deep into it, a lot of the strokes that you're losing and why so many people struggle to break 100, a lot of these things fall into that. So you might lose a couple of strokes under each of these categories. When you start tightening those things up and working on them, suddenly those strokes start disappearing and your scores start to come down. So that's why, I want to talk about these things, as much as possible to get people to sort of ingrain this. It's kind of like a mental memory, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know if I focus on these things, I'm going to be able to shave a couple of strokes, because there's no magic sauce. There's no waving of a magic wand that's going to make somebody better. You've got to actually put some effort into your game, but you have to understand what it is that you want to work on specifically and how to do it successfully. And as you pointed out earlier, practice with a purpose in order to be able to do that. And if you're just sort of willy-nilly going out there each week and not really focusing on anything and not addressing some of these issues, then you're never going to improve and you're just going to continue to be frustrated. So just a couple more here, and then we'll get a chance, as I said, to talk about your books and your podcast and that. But this is another one too that often we see, and that is really, believe it or not, people focus or fail to focus on keeping the ball in play. So what I mean by that essentially is they're so hyper focused on hitting specific shots. I've got to get it in two. I've got to do this. And sometimes what could be instrumental, just getting that ball back in play and setting yourself up for a better third shot perhaps, might be the smarter play. But no, I got to go for the green. I've got to make sure if I get it in two, I'm going to increase my chances. But their skill level may not do that, or their situation may be where they're not going to be able to get back on track if they don't get the ball back in play. So what are your thoughts here?
Well, when I was down in Florida over the winter, I was trying to play a little bit, work on my game, and I went out and I'd gone from playing a lot up here in Ohio, then I had a long period where I wasn't playing. And when I went out on the course, there was a couple of situations where I was in the trees and I was just trying to get the ball back into play. And I didn't hit a good recovery shot. I hit the tree and I ended up having to take an extra shot to get out. And it made me realize that when you lay off those little shots that you never, ever practice, no one ever practices those. And I always encourage my students before tournaments. And I'm playing in a tournament I've got a tournament on Monday. And one of the things I'm going to do over the weekend is just take a few minutes to hit what I call recovery shots. I'm going to do it on the driving range, and I'm going to hit with a pitching wedge some little punch shots where that I'm just trying to, like if I'm in the trees and I've got to punch it out to get back in the fairway, I'm going to practice it. Yeah. I'm going to practice a little shot where maybe I take a 7-iron and I'll hit a low punch to the right, that slices to the right, and one that'll hook to the left, in case I need to hit any of those shots on the course. Because if you wait till you get to the golf course to do it, then you're in trouble. The other big problem I see people make when they get on these in the trees and in recovery shots is they'll pull out a 4-iron or something like that, and they'll say, I don't use this club And I'll say, why do you have a 2-iron in your bag? Or why do you have a 3-iron? Oh, that's what I use to get out of the trees. And I was like, no, you need to get rid of that club. You can accomplish the same thing with a 7 or 8 or 9-iron. You just put your feet close together, you choke down on the club like you were talking about earlier, you lean to the left, and then you just make a small, chipping type motion, and you'll hit a shot to get back out, into play. So I think those are the kind of shots that no one really ever works on. And then when you get them, boy, you realize it's not as easy as it looks. When you see the tour players do it, believe me, those guys they work on all of those shots.
It reminds me very quickly, and then we'll wrap up with the last question, and then we'll get into your books and that. I remember as a kid, my dad was not as generous as what you are, just punching it off the range. We had the range that he often took me to, had a tree line on the right-hand side, and it was close enough to the teeing area that I could go over there into the trees, and he would take about 4 or 5 balls and he'd put them in different positions. And he'd say, okay, I want you to get it back out into the range, pretend that's the fairway. And he'd literally, and it'd be straw there, there'd be all kinds of hard dirt, whatever, roots and stuff. And he would certainly guide me through it, but he would always ask me, he'd say, what do you think you got to do here? Obviously, we're pretending the flag is out, this one out here. What do you got to do? Can you go for it? No. What can you do here? And he would do that, and he would put me in real life situations. And I'm not saying, and again, I'm not, everybody has that opportunity to be able to do that. So what you're suggesting is right on, but I'm just saying that's what he used to make me do, is to get out there and actually in real life situations. And sometimes later in the day on a golf course, when it was quiet and, there was just the two of us sometimes, and we would do that. He would grab a ball and say, come on over here. And we go off to the side, and he would put me in those situations because he wanted me to feel what it was like. And he wanted me to basically use the old brain box to say, okay, what do you got to do here? He'd make me think about it. Like he said, you're not always going to have a perfect lie out in the middle of the fairway. So you've got to be able to figure out ways of recovering and do that. So he would do that with me not all the time, but periodically. And I remember at first I really hated it because I thought, God, I can't believe he's making me do this, but then it paid off over time. So you got to be able to do that for sure. Last one is, this is something that I think most people struggle with, goes to what I was just talking about, that perfect lie. Most people, especially high handicap amateurs, struggle with the ball being either below or above their feet in very different situations. Obviously, we have to play to the slope. We have to understand that the slope is our friend if we set up properly. It goes to what you talked about earlier. Guide us through this real quick, if you don't mind. And what do we do when the ball is below or above our feet? How do we handle that as opposed to just a run-of-the-mill in the middle of the fairway shot that's even?
Well, the first thing that you're going to do anytime the ball is above or below your feet is you're going to have to adjust your spine angle. So if the ball is above my feet, the ball is physically closer to my body. So I'm going to be more upright with my torso. And then I'm going to tend, with that lie, my ball is going to tend to hook. For a right-handed player, it's going to tend to go from right to left. Or if you're left-handed, it's going to hook the opposite way. So I will tend to do one of two things, depending on my lie. Like if I have a good lie and the ball's above my feet, I'll move the ball a little bit back in my stance, about 1 ball. If I have a bad lie and the ball's above my feet, I'll move the ball back even more. It might be a little past the center of my stance. Because whenever the ball is above your feet in a bad lie situation, in like heavy rough, the rough automatically is going to tend to catch the club face and turn it down to make it hook. And the lie is going to make it hook. So you need to make sure and move the ball back a little bit to keep it from hooking too much. And then I adjust my target. So I'm aiming to the right of the target. So sometimes I might be aiming 15, 20, 30 yards right of my target in anticipation of this hook when I hit the shot. The second, when the ball is below my feet, for me, that is a more difficult shot because you and I are tall. So I've got to bend over more. I've got to bend my knees more. And the one thing I do on any uneven lie is I make more practice swings than I would if I'm hitting on a par 3 where I've got a perfectly level lie, because I'm trying to adjust the tilt of my body so that I can figure out where the ground is, because the ground is going to always be different on every single shot in golf. So you want to figure that out. So that's a quick guide. And when the ball is below your feet, the ball is going to tend to go to the right. The ball is always going to want to go downhill. So if it's going to when it's below your feet to the right, when it's above your feet to the left.
Yeah, great points. All right, so as I mentioned at the top of the show, we were going to handle some questions here. Thank you for doing that. You did a great job as always. But I want to give you a few minutes to talk a little bit about your books. The first one, Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game. I got it right that time.
Yeah.
And then your second one, Fairways to Heaven, One Shot at a Time. And then, of course, you're hosting a podcast of the same name. Tell us about the first book. Why did you write the first book? And then what led you to the second book? And then talk a little bit about your podcast.
Well, the first book I wrote, I knew that God wanted me to write a book. And I knew this because when I became a teacher, when I was down in Orlando, I was at the Grand Cypress Academy of Golf, and I was standing up in front of students and presenting information. God started suddenly giving me stories from my life. I mean, this just kind of bombarded my mind, and I knew that He wanted me to write a book. I knew that He wanted me to write a Christian book because I had a supernatural experience that happened to me when I was a teenager in high school, and I knew that I was supposed to do something with that. And so this went on, by the way, for about 20 years. I kept getting this information. I could be carrying on a conversation with a student, and I was being downloaded this information in my mind. And so in 2012, I started writing the book, and in 2016, it was published. And I had never written a book. I didn't know what I was doing, but God knew what He was doing, and He led me through that journey. And then that's really how I met you. I got on your podcast, and we started a great friendship through the years. And after the book was out and time was going on, and you purchased Golf Tips magazine, I asked you if you would be interested in allowing me to write a Christian golf feature called Fairways to Heaven. I just really felt like that would be a neat way in the book to bring Christianity and to bring golf to the readers. And you let me do that, in which was really kind of you to do. Mm-hmm. And you also wrote the foreword for the book, and I really appreciate that. You did a great job for that. And that book just was released last year, and so that's how the books came out. And then from that, I got contacted last October. I just was one day I get a call from New York City, and they from Bold Brave TV, and they asked me. They said, we want you to host your own show. And I didn't. I was like, what do you mean you want me to host my own show? And I the whole time I was a little skeptical. Right. I even called you after I got off the phone, maybe a few days later, to talk about it. But they said, we're noticing that there's a lot of Christian downloads going on, and we really our advertisers want content. And they said, we put in the word, we put in Christianity, and they use AI research, and we put in golf. And he said, you came up, and you were the only one that came up. And when you came up, we started watching your videos. He said they listened to me on a couple of the interviews with you, and they said, we really feel like you could host your own show. And so I prayed about it. I thought about it. And I really took some time to think about this, because it's not just a mild commitment. It's 50. I signed a contract for 52 shows. I've done 8 shows now. Mm-hmm. And it's been really exciting. And you've been a guest on 2 of the shows, and we'll be on more. And I really feel like that God is leading me in this journey. And so I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. And it's starting off as a great show. I know it's going to just continue to build momentum, and I'm glad, and thank you very much for, it's an honor to be on and talk about not just golf, but talk about our faith, and which we did a little bit more in the last one that I was on a few weeks ago. And, I think for me, what's been interesting about this journey, not just for myself, but, doing the show as you're finding out now with doing more of yours, is you really get to meet a lot of people. I met you through our conversations early on, and then I invited you on to Golf Talk Live on Coach's Corner, and you've been a guest as well over the years. And you get to meet a lot of people. And what was really interesting is we actually got to meet at the PGA show several years back face to face, and we talked in the program, and now of course we're here you are again on this show. But it's led to you to expand what it is you're doing, because And it's not to take away from the teaching aspect. I know that you love teaching; that's a passion of yours. But you've obviously felt led to do other things and expand that and to do more than just the teaching aspect. And you've come out and you've done 2 great books, and I was very grateful and honored to be asked to do a forward in your latest book. And I'm sure you might have one more book in you. I don't know. We'll see about that. And I'm always happy to help you promote it or to be a part of it in some way. But I just think it's important. The main reason I did my shows originally was, there really wasn't anybody doing this type of format for golf anyways. And I just looked at all the conversations going on online and social media about golf. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be great to do something like that? And I brought it onto the airwaves. You've done something similar, with your podcast. It's not just talking about golf and interviewing some great people, but to sort of marry your spiritual beliefs together with something that you're passionate about, of course, is golf. So again, the birth of Fairways to Heaven. So glad to be a part of it, and let the folks know, where can they go if they want to get the books? How can they go about doing that? And if they want to tune into the podcast, how do they go about doing that as well?
Well, if you want to read the books, you can go. There's a lot of different ways, but you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart websites. If you want an autograph copy, you can go to my website, deckergolf.com, and all my contact information is there. I can send you an autograph copy, but you can order them online. They also have an audio book for the first book, Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, has an audio book. And then my second book, Fairways to Heaven, has an audio book that will be coming out hopefully very soon. I'm in the final stages of reviewing it. The book is complete. I've got to review it though, and that's going to take me a couple more weeks to do. And then I'm hoping that by this summer that will be out as well. And then if you want to watch the show, there's a lot of different ways. My show airs live on Bold Brave TV on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to watch it live, you can watch it on Bold Brave TV. You can watch it through Facebook on my Facebook page. You can also watch it through YouTube Live, or you can watch it on LinkedIn Live. Now, most people can't watch a live show at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, so you can always go and download it afterward, and you can go to my YouTube, you can go to LinkedIn or Facebook on any of my platforms that I'm on. You can go and watch it there. Or you can go to my website, again, deckergolf.com, and I post it. Every one of my episodes are on the website. So if you go to my website, you can pull it off there. It's a YouTube link that you can watch it right there. And so it's great to download. Also, Spreaker, Spotify, getting a lot of downloads. I'm really impressed how that's working because I can track the numbers.
Yep.
And a lot of Spotify and Spreaker, there's a ton of downloads coming through those platforms.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's the beauty of social media and all of that is, getting the message out and that. And I think it's great to have something different. This was one of the things, as you mentioned earlier on about, sort of your pitch about doing Fairways to Heaven with the magazine, at that particular time was something different that really wasn't out in the golfing world. And, like anything, it's new, it's different, and there's always certain risks and elements, but it worked out to be something very good, and happy to continue with that relationship as well. But John, as always, thank you very much. And if they want to go to your website, it's deckergolf.com. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And all of your contact information, all of the landing points, if you will, that he talked about, you can access through the website. So go to deckergolf.com. And if you want to see him throughout the season on my program, Golf Talk Live, he'll be on Coach's Corner. Usually, I believe it's usually the second, or it's varied, but it varies. Usually about I think maybe the third Thursday is typically, but just keep staying in tune and you'll be able to see John here on the Coach's Corner panel. But my friend, have a very happy Easter. God bless and continue the great work. And I will see you real soon back here on the Coach's Corner panel on Golf Talk Live. Hang tight. I'm going to take a commercial break. And when I come back, I'm going to be joined by my very special guest of the evening, Mark Mattingly, the Executive Vice President of Landscape Golf Management. We will be right back.